Hi, I'm Nai, and I'm going to be talking to you guys today about designing inclusive dashboards. What do I mean when I say inclusive or accessible? Well, basically what that refers to is a recognition that not all bodies have the same abilities, and therefore, for some folks, they don't exactly perceive the world in the same way. And sometimes when they come across things that are designed for conventionally abled people, they end up facing some barriers. So essentially, as designers, as data designers, we can strive to try to alleviate some of those barriers that come up. So when we're talking about accessibility, we're talking about a couple different needs, but for the purposes of this presentation, I'm really going to be focusing on the visual. And the question is, why should we even care when we're designing for accessibility? Well, there's the obvious kind of, or at least obvious to me, social responsibility piece, which is basically empathizing with other people's needs and just making the world a little less crummy for some people. And there are also financial benefits to designing accessibly. So one of the things that folks have noticed is that websites that are designed accessibly tend to be more efficiently detected by search engines. So if you want to optimize your SEO, then designing accessibly is one thing to consider. They are also easier to maintain, so you do end up minimizing on your maintenance costs. And we do also have an aging population in most of the world right now, and so if you want to essentially widen your platform and reach out to a larger audience, you do want to consider accessibility needs. So yeah, next slide. So what are some things that we can do as far as being data designers and things we can do with Tableau specifically? One of the things we can do is to actually consider how we structured our layout. So the first thing you want to consider is to actually have your layout be fixed. And this is because if people are partially sighted, a lot of the times they will want to enlarge the text that they're looking at. And if your layout is fixed, it means that when they do that, things aren't going to go all wonky and end up in different places and places where they shouldn't be. So this is one of those cases where you do want to keep things fixed and not float. And then another thing is that people who are blind do actually consume information on the internet using screen readers. So what these screen readers will do is they'll read text that's on a web page and literally read it out, or they will translate it into Braille, which is what this this screen reader is doing right here. And yeah, so there are some other things you want to do as well as keep text as text in that case, not as an image, so that the screen reader can actually detect what's on there. So another thing you want to consider, if you'll go to the next slide, is to do what's called descriptive text. And a lot of people, when they first hear this, it sounds like it's a lot of work, but it's actually really simple. So it's literally describing what is on the screen. And this allows the screen reader to actually pick up on that text, and you're really not doing much. You've only got like a sentence or two, and it's summarizing the results that you're presenting, key points for your audience, and you also do want to have a link for a table, a text table, because the screen reader will pick that up, and it will give people who are wanting to consume that information the actual data behind what you've got on the screen. So this is a good example of that, and then you guys will get this in the slides. I really recommend checking this out because it's pretty cool. Next slide. Another thing you want to be conscious of is your color choices. A lot of folks are already familiar with this because of Tableau's default orange-blue colors. So does anybody know why that's something that Tableau does? No, okay, so not everybody's aware of it. So essentially, 8% of men are colorblind, meaning they cannot differentiate between red and green. They see some slight differences, but it's trickier. So the reason that Tableau defaults to orange and blue is to essentially avoid having the red equals bad, green equals good typical way that we design things. Oh my God, 1 minute. So yeah, Sophie actually brought up an interesting discussion about, well, if that's the case, how do we represent what's good and bad? I looked into it and looking at how do they actually look at traffic lights. And they do apparently know there's a difference between green and red. And the way they describe it is what we define as green to them appears slightly more blue than what we've defined as red. So in that case, I would say blue equals good, orange equals bad. And if you want to completely avoid that altogether, add some other contextual cues like shape, a cross for bad, a check for good. Or in this case, in the traffic lights here, they actually have an X on the stop. So if you're colorblind, you'll actually know you have to stop. So yeah, next slide. And the last piece is to make conscious font choices. About 10% of the population in the UK is dyslexic. And what ends up happening if you're dyslexic is you will flip letters around and mirror them. So a P might look like a B or a Q. An N might look like a U. And this is a really good example of how dyslexic folks might end up reading text. So to mitigate that, there are actually fonts that have been designed specifically for people with dyslexia. And essentially, when you look at these fonts, they've changed the letters so that each letter looks very individual. So the P might lean a little bit to the right, while the Q leans a little bit to the left. So there are ones that are for free. Those are 2 examples. And if you don't want to do that, then you want to avoid serifs, which is what Dama mentioned. Serifs are harder to read for folks with dyslexia and folks with visual impairments. So these are some examples of fonts that you want to use. And I'm sorry, Emma, Comic Sans is actually one of them. So yeah, people with dyslexia really like Comic Sans. So yeah. The one time Comic Sans gets the gold. So yeah, that's so there's a lot going on with that. Most of the literature that's out there has been about website design specifically, but I think there are at least some considerations that we can think about when we're designing our dashboards.